Thank you for joining us for the first of our NYU Summer Insider Series, where we're going to be talking to some NYU sports alumni and professors, just talking about their career, their path into their current roles, and kind of how NYU has played a role in that, and offering advice to all of us on how we can kind of replicate that and find our own position in the industry. So we have, like Dr. Kelly alluded to, we have an exciting group of panelists today. From the Brooklyn Nets Coaching Analytics Department, we have Logan MacPhail and Rohan Jaitley, both NYU grads. And then we also have the Vice President of Football Research for Sports Info Solutions and an adjunct professor with NYU, Matt Manocherian. So thank you, Logan, Rohan, and Matt for joining us this afternoon. So I guess without further ado, let's just jump right into it. Logan and or Rohan, can you talk a little bit about what your career journey has been like up to this point and sort of how NYU has played a role in that?
You want to go first, Rohan?
All you, sir.
So I actually, in my undergraduate degree was actually in political science. So my initial background wasn't really in the analytics focused field out of college. So I did a lot of my initial learning on my own through like online resources. I got started working for Major League Baseball in their labor relations department as an intern, kind of focused more on the salary arbitration side. And then from there, I went to go work for the New York Mets in their baseball operations department for several years. I then transitioned to work with Bloomberg Sports, kind of a sports wing off of the Bloomberg company. And then from there, I transitioned into analytics with the San Antonio Spurs with a coaching focus. I was there for 3 years. And then once Sean Marks was hired with the Brooklyn Nets, I transitioned with him over here to Brooklyn. And I've been in Brooklyn with the Nets since the 2016-17 season.
For me, so I'm an international student. I went to NYU undergrad, started in 2015, graduated 2019. I actually got to know Logan through the program. And you know, going to alumni networking events, going to networking events in general, I got to know a few people around the league. And while at NYU, I was in the sports management program, but I also took a bunch of statistics courses, math courses, you know, across different schools and stuff like that. And, you know, built my sort of data science background, and then eventually ended up right after graduation, moving over to Phoenix to intern with the Suns in their basketball analytics department. And while I was finishing up that internship, you know, I found out that the Nets had an open position that they were potentially hiring for, and, you know, found my way back to New York, and now Logan and I work together. Yeah.
It's great to see that, you know, that your position is kind of the fruit of NYU networking, which is kind of what we're trying to foster here. So that's great to hear.
Exactly.
And what about you, Matt?
Yeah, for me, I mean, my current job is the Vice President of Football and Research at Sports Info Solutions. Comes directly back to Vince Gennaro. Vince was the person who connected me with the people that were running at what at the time was known as Baseball Info Solutions. And they brought me on because he saw me as a young guy who was really interested in a lot of the same sorts of ideas, but from a football perspective, that being my sport, my background, having worked in the NFL for a few years. And it was a great meeting of the minds because for me now that I've been connected there, I see myself as a translator where I work with all these great analysts and kind of bring to them this new sport that they hadn't really considered a lot before. But it all comes back to the connections that I made through Vince. So.
That's awesome. Thanks, Matt. So yeah, I guess for any of the three of you, so what drove that initial interest in sports analytics, and kind of what keeps that passion alive today?
I could start off. Rohan, I didn't realize though that you were with the Suns before. Did you work with Jake Los with the Suns?
Yep, he was the one who hired me, but he left the organization about 2 weeks before I started my internship, so it was a weird situation. But yeah, I know Jake very well.
And just an example of how small a world it is, he just joined us at Sports Info Solutions, starting our basketball department. So just goes back to that networking and all that kind of stuff. Sorry, I got a little off track there, though. What was the question, Ben?
Yeah, it's all good. I think as a whole, the networking within sports analytics, it's an important point to drive that we're kind of all in this community together, whether a small panel like this or, whether the MIT Sloan Conference out in Boston. It's a very interconnected community, which is, why I've enjoyed getting to talk to all of these people so much. But anyway, my question was just about that passion for sports analytics, where that came from originally and what drives that passion today.
Yeah, sorry. So I worked with the Saints for a while, and the Saints were, and are still considered to be, the same people running that team, a very well-run football organization. And I learned a lot of great things there, had a lot of great experiences. Then I went to the Browns, who, of course, were very maligned for the way that they were run for years. And I got to see that up close. And I actually saw some ways that they were doing better decision-making and some ways that they were doing worse decision-making than what we did in New Orleans. And after seeing those systems and seeing this was very much the old world NFL, I was very frustrated by the same sort of things that anybody who's read Moneyball would be frustrated by, which is, man, I'm doing all this work out on the road as a scout. I'm doing all this to try to understand these players that I'm tracking, but there's not a really great process for understanding all of this data that the scouts are gathering. And that's what I was doing. I was gathering data as a scout, but it wasn't good data a lot of the time. And so that frustration that it could be done better, and seeing in baseball how it was already being done better and starting to be done better in basketball, I think that's what drove my passion. I don't know anybody that goes around saying I'm passionate in analytics because it's kind of a weird esoteric concept to be passionate about. But I am passionate about beating people at football. And if I can use this tool to make better decisions so that I can beat more people at football, then yeah, I'm passionate about it.
Yeah, that's a really great point, Matt. Logan or Rohan, anything to add there?
So I would say my initial interest started, I actually had a lot of family working in baseball, and I was kind of looking for a way to get in the industry, but trying to find like a unique way that other people weren't going into it. And that's about the time, it's kind of like the cliche answer, but like it's about the time Moneyball came out. And then I read the book, and I just at the time was completely unaware of the concept of like the fact that analytics could have a role in like an operations department. So I think that book kind of like opened my eyes a little to the possibilities. And I always had a strong math background. So once that started, it kind of started the ball rolling on just wanting to learn more about the subject and then improve those skills as well.
Totally. So I guess Logan or Rohan, whoever wants to tackle this, curious, like from within the industry, what are the biggest changes you've seen analytically over the last 5 years, maybe a decade, within like the NBA specifically?
I would say the biggest change I've seen has been the quality of the data, or in more like the granularity of it, meaning we used to work with like the equivalent of like what would be box score data, like at the beginning, and then kind of with the advent of Sport View and kind of the motion tracking data, once that kind of started to enter, I think the range and ability, like the types of questions we could answer increased significantly. And also kind of had to change, I guess, the skill sets that you had to both look for and then learn yourself. So that would be my answer. It's like probably like the biggest change.
Sure. Rohan, anything to add there?
Yeah, I mean, I think the skill sets part, I think it covers it pretty much. But yeah, the skill, there's always, as new data keeps coming up, I think, even us within the organization, we're always trying to learn something new. And I think, the thing with analytics, with technology, with coding is that it's always improving, always advancing. So you just kind of, there's a natural advancement in the way you're able to process and answer questions that I think, and even in the short time that I've been in the industry has been like, even within a year, I've seen that progress. So.
Totally. And Matt, are you seeing the same things in the NFL and college football?
Absolutely. It's night and day from kind of the old school NFL that I started in 2009. And the level of data, I definitely agree with Logan's point that the amount of data and the sorts of questions that you can answer has changed. At the same time, sometimes frustratingly slowly, but definitely, I think when you look back, you see a steady progress. The other thing that's changed is the appetite for it. Going from just an appetite of rejection for anybody that you want to find to now there's people, there's interest, there's coaches that really want to understand this because they understand how it can help them and make them better at their jobs. And just the appetite for it it's night and day from what it was, but it's still nowhere near where it is in baseball, where I sit in football. So just seeing the amount that it can continue to change and get people into the roles where it's not just the research is being done, but it's the investment in getting the best data so that you can do the best research, and then getting the right people in place to communicate it. Like you've seen with so many baseball managers these days, you've got bilingual former players who understand analytics. When we can get to that point in football where those are the people that are coaching, just the amount of understanding that you can have of the sport, we're just scratching the surface in football.
For sure. And so do you think that's like the biggest thing in the next 5 years you'd like to see, just more buy-in across the board?
Yeah, I think that's a bit of a natural process. And I think that sometimes people that do bad research and try to share it or push it on other people can do a disservice, to be honest, especially on the Twitter, where it can just be a recipe for that sort of thing. But I think as we move forward, we're going to start to see some real advancements. Like baseball and basketball are played differently than they used to be played. And I think that the amount that you'll start to see that in football is really going to start to change. I think it has, if you're an astute observer, you've noticed it a little bit already. But as we start to answer these questions and realize how wrong we were about certain ways that we used to look at things because we were so limited by box score data, and the more people that can buy into that, I really do think that it's going to result in a different looking sport.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I would also just add that, that it, to Matt's point, like, there is a spectrum of sort of the way, analytics is being bought into across the board, not just across leagues, but even across teams within a league. Like I came from an organization in Phoenix, which wasn't really that dialed in the same way, to an organization in Brooklyn where we do value data-driven decision-making. So, over the next 5 years, you're going to continue to see the average level of buy-in across leagues continue to go up, but there always will be, trailblazing teams that continue to sort of push the boundaries and to Matt's point, break down these biases that we have from our limited understanding that we've worked with leading up to this point as we get new data. So I think that's something we'll definitely continue to see, is like, there's always going to be new innovations, and there are going to be teams that will, kind of drive that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I just wanted to go back really quickly, Matt, so you mentioned Twitter, and I guess just having all of this information available out on the web, and, kind of having these microblogs and not so microblogs just available for anybody to talk about a project that they're working on. I was just curious, Matt, since you brought it up, or Logan or Rohan, you can touch on this as well. Just what do you think about Twitter as a tool for self-publishing and, establishing yourself within this community?
I think it's very powerful, and with great power comes great responsibility, sort of thing. It's great that it's created this whole analytics community, sports analytics community, which is a tight-knit group. I think of some people that I've only met on Twitter as close friends of mine at this point, and people that I ask questions to on the regular because I respect their opinions. So it's awesome in that respect. What I don't like is that Twitter has a way of taking a lot of people that want to make loud points more than nuanced points. And it tends to kind of echo that effect. And unfortunately, I think sometimes what happens, and what I was saying before with analytics, is that you'll get some very loud, very wrong people that are quote unquote using analytics that can piss a lot of people off. And when people feel that way and they feel threatened by it, there's a backlash that happens, there's a closing of the mind that happens, that that's the part of Twitter that I think is not so great. So in general, I think it's really good, and I think there's so much good that happens there. But it is a pet peeve of mine that just some person that's not, you know, really that well educated can make it look like they're doing something because they figured out how to use ggplot, and in actuality, they can make some really terrible points and kind of close people's mind, which is the opposite of, I think, what we're all fighting for.
Yeah, for sure. I
Yeah,
totally agree with you there.
I'll also add, like, one of the best pieces of advice I got from somebody in the NBA, I think it was my sophomore year, especially when it comes to like the analytics side of things, is show me, don't tell me. Like, you know, especially in the analytics field, you have access to basically any software you want to be able to sort of do some kind of analysis with. And obviously, you know, you don't have access to certain proprietary data that the NBA doesn't get, but doesn't mean you can't use sort of publicly available information to improve your decision making and improve your skills to be able to present that to teams, because I think that's what's going to set you apart if your goal is to eventually end up in a role like that. So that was a huge piece of advice I got, especially on the analytics side, to just, you know, do it, try it yourself and see how it goes. Usually, you know, you'll learn something, whether it works or doesn't.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really great point. Okay, awesome. So obviously we're in a bit of a uncertain times, kind of unforeseen in a long time, but specifically as it relates to sports, something I was just briefly talking with Logan about leading up to this panel. Obviously with the NBA moving into the bubble, teams are kind of having to reconstruct their rosters based on players that are opting out, or for whatever other reason. So I was just curious, you know, what are you seeing as far as the role of analytics, you know, running in operations of sports teams, specifically during the pandemic?
Yeah, I would say that I don't know if it's really changed. Like we're still being asked the same types of questions and being relied on the same. I would say, yeah, like, yeah, I don't know if Rohan wants to jump in here, but there really hasn't been too much of change. I think we've been fortunate that what we do is probably the least impacted relative to the other staff members who, I think a lot of ways they contribute to our success is more like in person. So I think we've been fortunate in a way that, like, it didn't directly impact our day-to-day workflow. But as far as, like, I would say maybe a little more like attention to it, just because people who didn't have things to do one of the things they did was ask us questions. So I think that it was beneficial in that way, but I wouldn't say it's been a drastic impact. But I don't know, Rohan, you can disagree with me.
No, 100%. It's, yeah, apart from the fact that, you know, you're in the office, you're part of the, you know, you're with the group every day and you're around the staff. Like, yeah, you get, you know, naturally as somebody's, you know, walking by, they might ask you a question that they normally would just, you know, float by. But other than that, 100%, like, you know, we can still do a lot of our research and a lot of our work wherever our laptop is. So hasn't really changed.
Is there any difference in the way that you guys are scouting players or using analytics to scout players? Like, for example, you know, like the Nets signed Jamal Crawford, they signed Michael Beasley, who then unfortunately tested positive and had to drop out as well. But I'm just curious, are those players that you're targeting specifically for this bubble environment, or are those players that maybe you were looking at before that, you know, now the opportunity presented itself?
No, I think we're literally just trying to fill out a roster right now. So like we had so many players, unfortunately, just not able to go down to the bubble. And I think the unique timing of when this happened in the season kind of limited the types of players we could look at to fill those spots. So I think, you know, that's really how it really changed from that perspective.
Yeah, understandable. You need bodies.
We
Yeah,
have
so
a question as well, if we can get to a couple. Two are for Logan and Rohan. So the first one is, during the pandemic, how were your jobs impacted? Are you guys in the bubble? Or are you just receiving information and relaying that information to those that are in fact in the bubble?
Yeah, so again, my job hasn't been too impacted just because kind of like what we were saying before, we're fortunate that the ways we can add value to the team can be remote. So to answer the other part, we're not in the bubble right now. We're in Brooklyn. But yeah, like I would say it hasn't impacted greatly. We're still in constant communication with our staff. So I think that the fortunate for us, the impact's been minimal.
Yeah, from an analytics side, it doesn't really change. I also do a bit of video work, and that's, again, it's just the communication that's changed. But I mean, we've been through a lot of the season already. We have processes on the way we plan and sort of work towards things. So just, getting used to a new communication method, which, can be challenging at times, especially when there's so much going on and so much new to adjust to, especially for the staff that's down there. But, we just trying to, at least, we try to work around them as best we can and help and still try to answer whatever questions they may have.
Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure.
We'll go on to one more as well. So what part of the flow of information do you focus on? Are you providing digestible numbers to the coaches throughout pregame planning, or do you provide in-game adjustments behind the bench as well?
So it's really both. I would say like the focus of the ways that we add value are both helping them prepare for opponents ahead of time and then kind of help analyzing the game after the fact. And then in game, it's a lot of, you don't try to make too many adjustments in game. But like, I think we're relied upon there's kind of optimal in-game strategies that we've kind of all come to adhere to. And I think kind of when we get in those situations, it's kind of my job to speak up to like communicate to the coaching staff and make them aware of those situations.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, guys. So I guess I'm just curious, Matt, if you're kind of seeing the same things right now from a more, outside of the organization perspective. Was there any difference in the way you scouted leading up to the draft this year, or anything now kind of leading to this unforeseen season?
Yeah, leading up to the draft, there were probably some teams that had to find other ways to do things that they couldn't normally do. They would have normally done in person. So they were really looking for different sorts of numbers and ways that they could understand things. So that was one thing that happened. But I would say there's really been kind of a dichotomy. In one sense, there have been a lot of teams that have been very tight with their budgets just because there's not going to be fans in the stands and it's really going to affect the football season. So with less budget, the analytics people that are always trying to fight to get more budget, which is definitely a struggle for a lot of NFL teams, that's become even more of an uphill battle. Budgets are frozen a lot of the times, and so they can't get sometimes the data that they thought they were going to be able to get just a few months ago. So there's a frustration there. I say a dichotomy, though, because on the other side of it, I think what some of the smart teams are doing is they're sort of doubling down on analytics and understanding how it can help them answer questions at a time when certain things are becoming more ambiguous. As things are taken away from all of us during COVID-19, there necessarily are also going to be other resources that make themselves abundant. And we've got to be able to pick those out and be really wise about them in this time. So one good example of that, I would say, is NFL teams have looked back to the last time there was a lockout, and they're anticipating a real spike in injuries this year when everybody gets back to play because of the amount of training that people couldn't do together under the watch, and it's going to be such a quick ramp up. So one thing that we do at SIS is we provide really intricate injury data. And there's been a heightened level of interest in teams trying to acquire this really great injury data because they can theoretically use that to try to better prepare themselves for the beginning of the season, which injuries are likely, which players are likely to get injured. There are lots of different ways that you can kind of slice and dice things. And as Logan was saying before, the better data you have, the better questions that you can answer. So, and it's pretty easy when you think about it from a dollars and cents perspective. If you can take a great player and prevent them from getting injured, I mean, it doesn't have to be Patrick Mahomes, but even if you're, preventing your starting defensive tackle from getting injured, every game that he misses is costing you millions of dollars. It can be really cost effective to make an investment in some better data if you think it can tangibly move the needle on the likelihood to become injured. So I think the teams that have thought about it like that and have actually realized, yeah, maybe I'm spending more money on this than I would have spent. But in actuality, there's been lots of money that's been moved from different budgets all over the place. And we can do something intelligent here that'll actually get us ahead rather than falling behind where everybody else kind of feels like they have to be at times like this.
Yeah, it's very interesting that you pointed back to, the last time we had an extended absence like this, like you mentioned, was the lockout shortened season. And I read an article this week actually about how passing numbers that season were crazy inflated, and how, maybe we can expect a little more of the same. And, smart guys like you are out there trying to find how can we maximize on that data? How can we take advantage of, of the situation?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think about it in something like baseball. When you've got a 60-game season in a sport as random as baseball, if you can create little advantages by using analytics, if the right roll of the dice, and you could be in the playoffs in the World Series, even if you're not a very good team. So sometimes I think that just trying to do these little incremental things, they can really add up, especially at times like these when markets that are usually more efficient are just completely thrown out of whack.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the name of the game with analytics, right? All right, awesome. So I kind of want to shift the gear here to more about, us as students, kind of what we can start doing now, whether, we're still in high school, undergrad, or graduate studies, or, maybe we've graduated, we're working, and, we found that this is a field that we want to get involved in. So I guess we can run through everybody, but just as a whole, like, what are some things that you suggest that that we can do now while we're still in school to prepare ourselves?
I think Rohan kind of hit on it a little earlier, but I'm also a huge proponent of, like, show me, don't tell. Like, I think people and all, like Matt, Rohan, myself, like, we see a ton of resumes a lot, and I think everyone's on paper is gonna look really good, but I think what separates you from other people is, like, a way to just demonstrate your skill set. It's one thing for you to, like, on your resume, tell me you can code. It's another thing if you can show me that you can. Just, it's more confidence in myself that, like, you actually can do what you say you can do. So any kind of way to demonstrate your skill sets, find unique ways to show it, I think is a great way to start.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think people are always asking, what should I learn? Should I learn R? Should I learn SQL? Should I learn Python? The answer is yes. You should learn one of them, and then you should try to probably learn another one of them. If you take to it, I don't think that'll really be pulling teeth. So at SIS, we tend to be a company that is very SQL dependent. We work, off of our own internal databases, and everything's organized that way. So any data that we need, it's incumbent on us to be able to write our own queries at the very minimum, and then hopefully to be able to do more with SQL than that. So I like SQL because even though it's a little bit difficult to understand, it's very kind of conceptually, it's very easy to understand once you dive in and start messing around with it. I don't really think it takes more than a couple of days, certainly not more than a couple of weeks, to be able to start writing your own simple queries and understanding kind of what it does. So I think that can be a really great entryway for people that are afraid and kind of overwhelmed by things. The thing about it that's difficult is you're going to need to be working with a database of some sort. So that, I think, tends to be the barrier there. Aside from that, most people in our R&D team, which are really our data scientists, are proficient at either R or Python. There are only a couple guys that really use both regularly, guys and girls. So I don't think it has to be a one or the other type of situation. There are strengths and weaknesses depending on what you're focused on, what your interests, what your skills are that you want to do. But I would say to be to be getting, that from that 100 resume stack into the stack of 10, we'd like to not just hear you say, oh yeah, I know how to do that, but actually get some demonstration that you can code in at least, I would say, one of those areas for a lot of the jobs that we hire for. The other thing that I would just piggyback on with that goes back to the show thing is these competitions that have popped up all over the place are really great. Public data competitions, like you see, the NBA, I know they've done the hackathon for years, which has been a great thing and gotten a lot of people jobs. The NFL now does the Big Data Bowl. There are dozens of people that have been hired to NFL jobs by competing in the Big Data Bowl. So, I mean, there's, I think, two really great things that go on whenever you do these. One, these leagues are making certain data sets of theirs public, and the more data that becomes public, I think that's really exciting, because then that means there's an open source community of 7 billion people that can figure really cool things out with sports data. So that's one thing that I love about it. But the other thing, and that I didn't really anticipate, because we're running a competition at SIS right now, a football analytics competition. Actually, it was just due on Sunday, and we're grading all the submissions right now and tailoring down our finalists before we have our big final showdown. But in the process, I'm looking around and I'm realizing, oh my gosh, all of these people are great candidates for jobs with us. For years, we go on ZipRecruiter and we do kinds of things like that to try to hire candidates. But it seems to me like I'd be shocked if the next person that we hire isn't somebody who came directly from this competition, because there's such an opportunity to show, like what Logan and Rohan were talking about before. That's literally all that it is people just showing what their skills are. So, I mean, you got to do whatever you want your next job to be. Whatever you want it to be, start doing it now. And that's a great way to show it.
Just to add, since you didn't mention it, Matt, I thought it was amazing that you guys used this opportunity to raise some money for social issues as well. I thought that was really, really cool.
Yeah, that's not related to the data as much. It's just that's the other cool thing about it, and that's what prompted us to do this competition. And we said, yeah, we'll put some data out there publicly. We'll give people a chance to have some fun with it and see what they come up with. And it all has gone to a good cause. So we've made a few $1,000s. So we're pretty pumped about that. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thank you guys. I thought that was awesome. Yeah, go ahead, Polina.
Question. So I have one for Logan. So what online resources did you use to educate yourself as you transitioned into coaching analytics?
So I did a lot of the online courses, either like through Coursera or like online coding camps. Like those are great personally, just because one, they're cheap, they're free. So, and a lot of it, it's a great way to kind of initially start. And then I think like Matt said, you kind of then have to immerse yourself in it after the fact, and don't be afraid to Google questions. That's step through. Like anything you don't know, Google it, and Google will always, you're not the first person to ask this question before. So it's you kind of like a iterative process, and really the only thing that's going to get you to like the level you need to is just experience and time. Like don't try to stuff 5 years of learning in like a week, right? Like it's going to take time.
Yeah, something I was going to add before that, Logan, you kind of touched on there. As we're unfortunately furloughed from work or out of school, or maybe we have more time since our classes are online, what better time to pick up a YouTube lesson and teach yourself SQL? I mean, I think I used an intro to SQL video that was 3 hours. That was it. And, you come out with like a great foundation to be able to jump in and, kind of learn at your own speed from there. So if you have nothing better to do right now, I think there's worse things to spend your time with. Polina, were there any other Q&A you wanted to get to?
Yeah, we can get to another one. So let's see here. So has basketball analytics changed how NBA teams are evaluating potential college prospects and international players as well, opposed to traditional methods of watching players on the field? And I think this is an interesting question as well, because you can really apply that to how analytics is going to shape, post-pandemic, how that's going to go into it as well.
No, for sure. I think teams have been doing that for a while, of kind of supplementing the scouting process with like an analytics, not background, but like an analytics study into the players as well. Like, I don't think there's this. I think the scouts, compared to just a simple numbers approach, the scouts are always going to be better. But I think what's proven to be the most beneficial is when you combine both sides of the analysis. I feel like those type of like wisdom of the crowds approaches for especially something like the draft have shown to be way more predictive than just taking just a numbers side or just the scouting side.
I'll piggyback and say we find the exact same thing in football. I've never seen a piece of research that's worth its salt that says anything other than that you would take the scouting data ahead of the performance data from college, but then the combination of those two would be better than either of them individually. That's pretty consistently what we find.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. So are there any, I know Logan mentioned Moneyball, and I know last semester in Matt's basketball analytics class, basketball on paper is like the holy grail for basketball analytics. So I was curious, are there any other books or articles or maybe specific authors that you would suggest reading just to, broaden your analytical horizons?
I mean, one thing I love to read while I was in college was Nylon Calculus with Fanside, I think it is. But I think they have a lot of really smart young people just, trying to present what they're, studying, reading. And also it gives you, again, it's also very sport dependent on what sport you're looking to get into. Your analytics skills are one thing, but then marrying that with an understanding of the sport you're interested in is the second step. And yeah, you should definitely be trying that by yourself. But then reading stuff like Nylon Calculus, another great resource is whatever Ben Falk's website has left over from a public resource standpoint. He does do it. For me, especially, was very a good starting point to understand some fundamentals.
Is he closing the website? Is that no longer a thing?
Well, he just doesn't write anymore, right? He just
okay.
provides public data. But people like that, people who've been part of the industry, been part of it. And then third, and this is just very underrated, is just talking to more people in the industry. I think that can go a huge way, and asking them, really thinking about questions and asking them those questions can, you can be surprised sometimes, like, oh, I never thought about it that way. Or you might end up teaching somebody else, hey, I never thought about it the way you're thinking about it. And that might, that's something that sticks. So for a lot of reasons, just doing that as well can be super important.
Yeah, I think that's actually like another area where Twitter's actually been really helpful. Social media in general is a lot of times it's not specifically like one person I'll follow consistently. Like somebody will just write something interesting, and you'll read that specific subject, and it's kind of like a more piecemeal approach to keeping up with like what's going around in the industry. I think just monitoring social media for like interesting topic or just a study that sounds interesting to you.
Yeah, that might be something that might not occur to a lot of people in the audience. That is, reading studies can be really helpful. It doesn't have to just be something that you found on the internet. Sometimes those articles that are things on the internet are referencing studies where you can go and you can see behind the curtain what exactly is being done. And that's a great way to learn new methodologies. I'm constantly reading baseball, basketball papers because they've done so much more work than a lot of public football analysis has, that it's more frequent than not that I'll stumble across something that, oh, wow, we can apply that methodology to answering this question about offensive line play. There are just tons of ideas that carry over and translate from one sport to another. But understanding the methods that people are using is one thing that's really great to just constantly be immersing yourself in.
For sure.
Yeah.
Just to add on to that point real quick, like SSRN is a great place to just, I spend a weird amount of time on there just like reading random research papers, to be honest, but it's just great. You read, you learn something new. And to Matt's point, like you might be reading something about, analyzing political sentiment, and you might be like, oh, that's an interesting way to apply something that might work with what I'm doing. So it can bleed into a lot of different places.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that methodology is huge. And something I was going to add, to answer my own question, a blog I really appreciate is R bloggers. And the whole idea is, I want to answer this question using R, and just to see the thought process of, okay, here's how I want to go about answering that question. Here's the code that I'm going to use to answer that question. And here is how I've answered that question. And you can kind of see that thought process, and you can kind of, change things. Maybe you want to look at shooting guards instead of point guards. Maybe you want to look at 2012 data instead of 2016 data. And you can kind of plug and play and make it your own. And I found that to be a really good learning tool. Okay, so I think John had a question, if you want to jump in now.
Yeah, first of all, guys, thanks for taking the time to join. I know I speak for everyone here. We really appreciate it, and we're going to soak up that knowledge as best we can. But question that I had was, some sports are utilizing analytics more than others, whether that's because some seemingly are more of a fit based off of either the pace or the specific stats that are recorded and translated into data and how well we interpret those. But do you feel as if certain sports are more geared towards the use of analytics and data mining and whatnot? And, kind of to piggyback off of a question we have from Aggie, it's obviously beginning to become more of a numbers game rather than that gut sense of feel and touch and familiarity with the sport. But what do you think, and what do you have to say to people that don't like to necessarily judge or base things off of analytics and kind of go the more traditional route of trusting their gut?
I'd say there's nothing wrong with trusting your gut. Like, I think half the pressure is on us as analysts to find effective ways to communicate data to people who aren't necessarily data people. And a lot of times I see, I think Matt kind of referenced it, like with like online conversations, a lot of times is that conversation can kind of get like argumentative rather than like you're getting angry that they can't understand it the way you're talking about it. So I think sometimes you need to kind of take an introspective look and make sure that, your job as an analyst is to communicate the data to people. So make sure that, don't necessarily blame the person you're communicating to that it's their fault. You need to kind of look at the way that you're approaching it, and is there a more effective way that you can communicate your message, but also be real that some people just aren't going to buy into it, and it's okay. Like, that's not the problem. There's multiple ways to look at this.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. One thing that I think people don't realize when it comes to how applicable analytics are or how much they're adopted by various teams is how big of an impact ownership has in that, and particularly the different sports. So I think baseball, it probably goes without saying that it's very clearly lends itself to analytics in a lot of ways. These individual one-on-one matchups, people have thought about it in this sense for more than 50 years. And so you understand why it's intuitive there. But a big part of the reason why I think basketball is ahead of football right now is because you get a lot more kind of new money owners, people that have come up on their own rather than old legacy families like you see in the NFL more often. And I think that has something to do with the rate of change that you see and the rate of adoption. Because at the end of the day, anybody who's run a company that's come up in the last 20, 30 years understands the value of data and understands that analytics is just another word for decision-making. And if you really look at it that way. And so it's kind of ridiculous to ignore this tool that I think can obviously help any sort of business, not just sports that seem to lend themselves more or less. So ownership is one part of it that I would look at. Another part that I would say is, okay, baseball, at my company, we deal with a lot of baseball and a lot of football. We're getting into basketball more now too. But with baseball, the big frustration is that all the low-hanging fruit has been picked. So even though it lends itself to analytics, it's been lending itself to analytics for years and years and years. There's still lots of new stuff. They're going to get the Hawkeye technology starting tomorrow. We're excited to see what that rollout looks like. And there'll be new data that comes from that and new questions that we can answer. But at the same time, it can be really frustrating for baseball analysts because you're fighting for such little incremental improvements. A lot of the big stuff has been done, sort of. Whereas in football, we just think, okay, you think it doesn't fit, it doesn't lend itself to analytics. To me, that just means that there are more questions that we can think of to answer that you're not going to be willing to engage in a way that can provide as much of a competitive advantage for you. So even if I don't get, the same type of R squared that I'm used to looking at when I do baseball analytics, when I do football analytics, I can still understand. And part of the job of any analyst is not just to say, yes, you should trust this, no, you shouldn't trust this. It's to say, yeah, I only have really about 25% certainty in this recommendation. So you probably should trust your gut versus, no, man, 99% of the time, this is a bad decision. I need you to abandon your gut right here. And as an analyst, part of our job is to parse out when it makes sense to trust the gut, which is another word for expert opinion, versus what the numbers are saying to me. Whenever they agree, it's nice and easy, right? Then we've just got, we got another opinion, it's good. But when they don't agree, that's when it's harder. And that's why we've got to be quantifying our level of certainty in everything.
100%. I, just piggybacking off that point, I think one of the things I learned, like in a statistics course at NYU actually, was that human beings generally have three settings in terms of how they look at the world. It's like, I know it, I don't know it, or I don't know. Or like a middle, like 50-50. So basically it's kind of transferring our thinking of like 0 probability, 100% probability, and 50% probability to understanding that things are on a spectrum. There's no 100% right answer. There's no 100% wrong answer. And that's why analytics becomes so useful, because you can actually quantifiably say that you have a certain level of certainty, to Matt's point, that this is how we expect things to happen. And you won't be right or wrong all the time. And that's where, again, with people, that becomes argumentative. It's like, oh, you were wrong. Oh yeah, well, I don't, just because I said it's 75% certain doesn't mean it's 100%. And that communication gap has to be bridged, right? And like, that's why the good organizations that are data-driven understand that. And they also use data to evaluate their own like human decisions as well. So you actually start to realize how much of a spectrum it is. You won't get all decisions 100% right. So thinking with data and making data-driven decisions, even if you're at the end of the day making decisions based on your gut, you're still evaluating them from a probability standpoint. Like, it should have worked out. Maybe it didn't this time, but 3 out of 4 times you would have expected it to work. So just thinking about things that way, I think a data-driven approach really changes it for a lot of organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point. So Polina, we have like 10 minutes left. Do you want to hit a few more of these Q&As?
Yeah, we have one question here from Farron. So with more top prospects foregoing college basketball for the G League, has there been an added emphasis on analytics in the G League?
Yeah, it's kind of like we've always had a focus on analytics in the G League, but kind of in a different sense of looking at, I would say, more pro-ready players and how well they could translate to the NBA, where you have cases where high schoolers are foregoing college and going straight to the G League. It's kind of adding a new variable of like, we're used to looking at players in similar age ranges, and I think you can look at their direct contributions coming in like the short term, whereas now you kind of have to add more of a long-term focus. So, it can get tough. We kind of run into the same issues when we look at international prospects, because it's kind of the same boat of, you have kind of younger players who are a little more like long-term prospects combined with like more pro-ready players in Europe. And essentially the G League is kind of turning into a version of that, where you're going to kind of be combining younger long-term players with more pro-ready players. And I think it's just from an analytics perspective, we'll just have to shift and understand that. But we're kind of at the mercy of the data, and that it's going to be, it's going to be hard to make assessments right away. Like, you're going to need to see the sample size can increase before we can, like Matt said, have like a certain level of certainty of how we communicate that.
I'm sure it helps like having the actual affiliated club in the G League though, right? I'm not sure if you were there before those affiliations were created, but how do you see that, playing a role?
I mean, it helps. Like when I was in San Antonio, that we had G League affiliate in Austin. I think it helps more for player development purposes. Like it's a kind of a way you have control of getting younger players who may not have the ability to get minutes at the pro level to still find a way to get them to get minutes. And it's a lot easier to do when you have the control of the team and you can essentially kind of dictate how many minutes they're going to play, where I think a lot of teams have issues who don't have a direct affiliate where they can't. If you have a young player, like I remember Portland used to have it with Anthony Simons, like trying to find ways to, and like a G League team that he could go to and like find minutes to play. So I think it's having control of your own kind of like minor league affiliates, but huge for player development purposes.
Anything to add there, Rohan?
No, I think he summed it up pretty well from a G League perspective.
Sure. Yeah, so I guess just to like wrap a bow on the panel, are there like any, last bits of advice, whether, things to read, scripting languages to learn, or just, I guess, any tips as far as our Python or SQL are concerned? Just any advice for those, preparing or already searching for a job in coaching analytics? Sports analytics, I should say.
So I think the one thing, I know we already touched on this a little bit, but as somebody who, pretty recently came out of college, I think the biggest challenge and the biggest hurdle for especially first-time coders, and I've definitely been there, is just doing it. Like we do a lot of online courses and we, we'll listen to people talking about it and we might, try one small thing, but like, I think really opening up the program and doing it yourself, whether you do it with the class or whether, you stop after and you sort of try different things and play and pull around with it. I think that's so important, and actually, becoming proficient in, because I always say all you need to really learn is understand how to talk to a computer. After that, the language is just, the top layer, because most languages at the end of the day are pretty similar. So that's why once you master one and learn how a computer processes commands, you can sort of transfer and learn other languages that interchange pretty strongly. And that's, then you have even more value to add. But the only way you get there is passing that first hurdle. And it can be intimidating, right? Like you don't know what's going to happen if you press a command. The beauty of coding is it's either going to work or it's not, but nothing is going to break. And that's something I honestly really struggled with at first, but just pushing yourself to do it and just getting into the habit of trying it, I think that'll go a really long way in like improving your coding skills really fast.
Yeah, to that point, we teach a SQL class to video scouts at SIS, and it would be a 6-week course that we would do with an hour each time. And we used to do an hour of material each time, and maybe 10% of the class would really pick up SQL. We switched the course up to just be 30 minutes of teaching and 30 minutes of you playing around with whatever you just learned, sitting there in front of us. And we had like 80–90% of people make it all through 6 weeks and pick up and start using it regularly on the day-to-day. So really the ability to do that, I think that's a great point, Rohan. The other thing I'd say, just in addition to the other things we've talked about here today, is shooters got to shoot. So like you literally will miss 100% of the shots you don't take. So when you're looking for a job, just keep shooting. Like you got to keep shooting, because you never know when the opportunity is going to pan out. You never know which interview is going to prepare you for something down the road, who you're going to meet. And if you're worried about annoying people and stuff like that, trust me, when you're on this end of things, it looks like somebody that's hungry. It does not look like somebody that's annoying. I say that at risk of having people come at me and start annoying me. But I really, really believe shooters got to shoot. So if you're looking for a job, do it, show that you can do it, all that kind of stuff. You got to actually learn it, and you got to show that you can do it, and you got to do your next job, but then you got to shoot. So send that resume out, get on the phone, do whatever you can.
Yeah, I was totally going to say what Matt was going to say. Like you're going to have to be resilient. Just be prepared. You're going to get rejection. Like it's rare that you're going to get a job the first time you apply for something, especially in sports analytics. It's a very limited number of jobs, and a lot of people want to do it. And just don't get discouraged from initial rejection. It's going to happen. Like don't think there must be something wrong with you or you're not learning it right. Like I can't tell you how many no's I've gotten from teams before I got a job. So just don't be prepared for it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I'll let Dr. Kelly take it from here.
All right. Well, first and foremost, thank you, Logan. Thank you, Rohan. Thank you, Matt. This series has been pretty exciting for us as part of the Sports Industry Networking Database. This student-led initiative has been the brainchild of students you see on this panel, as well as a lot of hard work behind the scenes. And we're really glad to have alumni and professors who are willing to work with us on this type of initiative during the post-COVID phase as we try to transition back to a sense of normalcy. And so thank you to everyone out there watching. We really appreciate it. And it's been an exciting day, and we look forward to you joining us in 2 weeks for our next installment, which will be Women in the MLB. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.